and thank you for having me here today to address you on what is probably the single most important question facing our country. How do we restore real growth? I say that how do we restore real growth is the most important question, simply because if we cannot find the answers to that question, then we will not meet today's challenges. Challenges emanating from what is happening right now in the Middle East and in Ukraine too. Challenges resulting from the decoupling of the US from European security. Challenges that feed through into a now pretty robust consensus that the UK has to commit significantly more resources to our national defence. On this, the government has committed to spend 3.5% of GDP on defence by 2035, a figure that is short of where Poland and the Baltics are right now, and yet a figure that would imply around 40 billion of additional spending every year. For context, that is around twice the fiscal headroom that the Chancellor gave herself in the last budget, and it's equivalent to an additional 5p on the basic rate of income tax. That is a big fiscal challenge. And yet defence is only one of the key challenges facing our country today. We have a high level of public debt, which, despite what the Chancellor may tell you, is set to continue rising every single year as a proportion of the size of our economy. And last year, in a higher interest rate world, we spent around twice as much on the servicing of that debt as we did on defence. We also have an ageing population, with the Office for Budget Responsibility projecting that health and social care will be the fastest growing pressures on the public finances over the coming decades, along with the state pension. There's also the challenge of intergenerational fairness, or unfairness. Younger people who have been stuck with low real wage growth, high property prices, and student debt. That needs fixing. Meeting these challenges will require us to ask tough questions about what government does and how it goes about doing it. But it will also require significant resources as well. And that means that the need for higher growth has seldom been greater. And of course, if you can achieve greater growth and sustain that through time so that it compounds up, then beautiful things can happen. The OBR estimate that if we added 1 percentage point to our rate of productivity growth, which would return us to the pre-financial crisis trend, then that would be enough to keep our debt as a proportion of GDP below 100% throughout the next 50 years. That is compared to the current projection, which is for that figure to rise to 270%. Or looking at it another way, if we had maintained our pre-global financial crisis rate of growth, then our economy would today be 25% larger than it is now. Think of all the problems you could solve with an economy a full quarter larger. And we should take heart from the fact that achieving that level of growth is not something that belongs to a foreign land. It is something that we have done before, right here in our country and over many years. Now, I don't want to pretend that this is something that will be easy, that growth can be easily rustled up. Delivering it will require political backbone, some tough choices, and courage. And the good news is that Kemi Badenoch, as a leader, has plenty of backbone. And growth, of course, starts with fiscal responsibility. Without that, debts mount up, interest charges rise, economic and investor confidence wanes, and fiscal pressures multiply. So at our conference last autumn, we announced our golden economic rule, whereby for every pound of savings made, at least half goes to reducing the deficit. But unlike fiscal responsibility, economic responsibility is more than just balancing the books. Governments can choose to increase spending in an apparently fiscally responsible way by ensuring that the tax receipts are there to cover it. But that does not mean that fiscally neutral spending is economically responsible. Indeed, it is clear to me that doubling down on tax and spend, as the current government have been doing, is simply unsustainable. And it's irresponsible because it means a higher tax burden, a larger state, and the crowding out of productive activity. An approach that through time weighs against growth. As the OBR themselves said at the time of the Chancellor's first budget, the government's decision to significantly increase spending crowds out private sector investment and distorts economic decisions. And as a result of this approach, our state spending is now far higher than it is in faster growing economies like the United States. In a sense, the rider is becoming heavier than the horse. The size of the UK state is now approaching the levels seen in many European economies. And whilst it is true that some of those economies are nonetheless outpacing ours, they typically have other advantages, like cheaper energy and cheaper housing. Now, at its core, economics is about incentives. And when the state takes up an ever-increasing share of our economy, that creates poor incentives, as do the high taxes needed to pay for it. It means that more of the economy is taken up by the public sector, which lacks the competitive dynamics of the private sector, is slower to innovate, and is typically less productive, less supportive of growth. And some forms of spending, of course, can be especially economically harmful. Misguided welfare spending is one example. In our country, we're spending tens of billions every year on benefits for people who can and should be working, but who have become trapped in welfare dependency. In my short time as Work and Pensions Secretary, I started to reform the system and arrest the growth in the bill, not just because it was right for the people concerned, and not just because it saved money, but because it was unashamedly pro-growth. And that is why getting the benefits bill down has been central to our agenda in opposition. It is not just the fiscally responsible thing to do, it is a growth priority too. And on tax, we've seen no better example of how a high and increasing tax burden can damage growth than this government's decision to increase national insurance on employers. That jobs tax has massively reduced the incentive to hire new workers, especially younger people, and has been a disaster for the labour market, with unemployment at its highest level since the pandemic. All of this was obvious to those like myself who spent years growing businesses from the ground up. Experience that is lamentably lacking on the government benches and a key part of the problem. And getting taxes down can really drive growth. Take the tax we in the Conservative Party have identified as one of the very worst, stamp duty on homes. We'd abolish it and free up the property market to help people move to where the work is, younger people to get on the property ladder and older people to downsize. And we'd unleash all that extra economic activity that accompanies a home move. The painters, the decorators, the plumbers, electricians, designers, furniture stores, and so on. Getting spending down, especially welfare spending, but also the size of the public sector, is not about ideology. It is about growth. And that is true of getting taxes down too. If we cannot grow if people and businesses do not have the right incentives to work, to invest, to innovate, and those incentives are being strangled by a growing state sector and ever-increasing taxes. But as well as getting spending and taxes down, we also need to tackle other clear barriers that have been holding back economic growth. To illustrate the effect of some of these barriers, let's think about artificial intelligence. If we want to lead the way in the AI revolution, we're going to need data centres. And they require huge amounts of electricity. In Ireland, they consume around 20% of the country's electricity output, 20%. But the UK has the highest industrial energy costs of any major economy. Data centres use vast amounts of water, Yet in the UK, we haven't built a new reservoir in over 30 years. Companies will need to construct data centres quickly and cost effectively. But our planning system delays projects for years and imposes layers of bureaucracy and additional costs. A country that scraps HS2 whilst delivering a £125 million bat tunnel is up against the Chinese, who built the Beijing to Shanghai superfast railway in just 3 years. And commanding AI needs people with skills. And yet, 30% of those attending our universities would have been better off financially if they had not attended at all. Far too many are doing duff degrees at duff institutions. We will need a far more nimble skills offering if we are to meet the requirements of the rapidly shifting sands of a labour market churned up by artificial intelligence. Meeting these challenges is not easy. There is no 5-minute fix. And there is no amount of minor tinkering that will deliver the solutions needed. What is required is deep, sometimes radical thinking and political will. On energy, for example, the Conservative Party has, it's fair to say, been on a journey since we left government. We have recognised some of the mistakes that we made, recognised that the extent of the trade-offs involved in pursuing our net zero targets, some of which did not make sense. That took honesty, but it was right. And we will need to be willing to make tough calls, have fights, and win arguments across a number of areas if we are truly to unlock growth. For politics is the art of the possible. And we will have to take the public with us if we are not only to have the right plan, but the opportunity to deliver it. And one of the challenges here is the extent to which many people in Britain today do not fully grasp how far we have been fading in the global economic race. People, of course, have a general sense that our economy has not been growing strongly enough for some time, that there are very real cost of living pressures. But too many tend to think we are still much richer than most of our peers. And the fact is, we are not. Far from it. An illustration of this is the recent study by the Institute of Economic Affairs that found that when voters were asked to guess where the UK would rank in terms of GDP per capita if it were a US state, gave on average the response of 7th. The actual answer is 51st. We are poorer than every single US state. And this is a problem. Because if voters don't grasp how far behind we are falling and its consequences for their standards of living and security, then they will be less likely to accept some of the difficult decisions we have to take to fix our economy. Less likely to appreciate that we're becoming less secure as a country, as our competitors increasingly outperform us and can afford, amongst other things, more ships, planes, tanks, and submarines. In short, if people don't have a proper sense of the scale of the challenge, they will be far more reluctant to accept tough trade-offs, less likely to accept some of the changes that will be necessary if real growth is to be secured. So there is work for all of us to do, in essence, to campaign for growth, to demonstrate to the public why growth matters. Now, identifying the problems is in many ways the easy part. Finding the right policy solutions requires work, but it's eminently possible. But for those policies to be deliverable, we will have to take voters with us, and we will have to win arguments. That is something I'm determined to do, and going forward you'll hear more honesty from my party on a number of important issues. And what should we expect from the state is a question that is not asked enough. And in turn, part of the way of achieving that is to demonstrate not only that greater growth can bring higher living standards and greater security to our country, but it can bring greater opportunity to millions of people too. That a rapidly growing economy can generate the skills, the infrastructure, the well-paid jobs of the future, that it can drive social mobility. And key to this is to revive what we used to call popular capitalism. Now, at the moment, when it comes to accumulating wealth, people care a lot about the housing market in this country, but very often, very little else. Engagement in the stock market has collapsed, and on this, we are an outlier. In the United States, almost 2/3 of the population are invested in stocks and shares. In the United Kingdom, it is less than 1/4. And if you look at our pension sector, in the 1990s, on average, over half our pensions were invested in UK equities. Today, it is less than 5%. That is a shocking decline. And while household savings have built up since the start of the pandemic, the trend has been towards cash savings, not investment. Not only does that mean households aren't getting the returns they could be, and the magic of compound interest, it also means people aren't investing in British companies in the way that they used to. Some of that is structural, but some of it is cultural. As a party, we are engaged in a substantial piece of work on how we will deliver on inclusive, popular capitalism, how we will cut people into our growth story, drive domestic investment in UK businesses, and build an economy more investable than at any time in our history. In New York, when you get into the back of a yellow taxi, the driver might say, "So what do you think of Apple stock?" The litmus test for me is when the London cabbie does the same. So, growth matters. Unless we ramp it up, we will not sustain a secure country or a healthy society. We will simply succumb to the challenges that swirl around us. We will slide further, we will fade, and we will decline. We can grow far faster, and the prize for doing so is huge. But to do that requires serious changes in policy, radical change, an end to the managerial incrementalism that has characterized economic policy for far too long. We will have to win critical arguments along the way. We will have to be honest with people about where we start from, honest about the trade-offs, but show them too that there is something in it for all of us in a country that is growing again. Thank you.